"You missed a spot, cursed one." The words cut through the arena like a blade through flesh. Kira felt them settle into her bones, joining the collection of cruelties she had learned to carry without breaking. She kept her head down, scrubbing at the bloodstain that had already come clean 3 passes ago, her knees grinding against the rough stone floor. "Did you hear me, wolfless freak?" Damien's voice grew sharper, and she could feel his shadow falling across her back. "I said you missed a spot." She had not missed anything. The arena floor gleamed under her careful attention, every trace of yesterday's combat trials erased by her methodical work. But contradicting a pack member would only bring worse punishment, and Kira had learned long ago that survival meant swallowing pride until it dissolved completely. "Yes, Beta Damien." The title tasted like ash in her mouth. "I'll clean it again." His laugh was cruel and practiced. "That's right. Clean it until it's perfect. Clean it until you remember your place." Kira dipped her brush back into the bucket of soapy water, the liquid now pink with diluted blood. Her place. They never let her forget what that was. The pack's scapegoat. The cursed daughter of dead traitors. The girl whose very presence brought misfortune to Crescent Moon Pack. When her parents died in the border skirmish 5 years ago, the whispers had started immediately. Bad luck followed the Grey family. First her mother's difficult pregnancy that nearly killed them both. Then her father's unit getting ambushed on what should have been a routine patrol. Now every failed harvest, every sickness, every minor inconvenience became her fault somehow. The girl who should have died with her parents but selfishly clung to life instead. She scrubbed harder, letting the burn in her shoulders anchor her to the present. The arena would host another trial tonight, and it needed to be spotless. Alpha Marcus demanded perfection for the pack's entertainment, and Kira's hands provided it. They might call her cursed, but they had never been able to find fault with her work. "Pathetic," Damien muttered, but his attention was already shifting away from her. Something had caught his interest beyond the arena walls, and Kira felt the familiar relief that came with being forgotten again. She continued cleaning until his footsteps faded completely, then finally allowed herself to straighten. Her back protested the movement, muscles cramped from hours of bent labour, but she welcomed even this small freedom. Alone in the arena, she could almost pretend she was just a girl doing honest work, instead of the pack's designated target for every cruelty. The massive doors at the arena's entrance suddenly boomed open, and the sound echoed through the empty space like thunder. Alpha Marcus strode in, his expression grim and his scent heavy with anxiety. Behind him followed Beta Cain and several of the pack's council members, their faces equally troubled. Kira immediately dropped her gaze and pressed herself against the wall, making herself as invisible as possible. When the pack leadership gathered like this, it never meant anything good for someone like her. "The message arrived this morning," Alpha Marcus was saying, his voice carrying across the arena despite his attempt at quiet conversation. "He'll be here within 3 days." "Are you certain it's genuine?" Beta Cain's question held a tremor that made Kira's skin crawl. She had never heard fear in the Beta's voice before. The seal was authentic, black wax marked with the symbol of the Northern Crown. Alpha Marcus began pacing, his agitation clear in every step. "Fenrir, the Beast of the North, is coming to our territory for the seasonal dominance trials." The name hit Kira like a physical blow. Fenrir, even she, isolated and scorned as she was, knew that name. Every wolf in the continent knew that name. The Beast of the North, the Alpha King who had conquered 12 territories in 5 years. The monster whose very presence could make entire packs submit without a single battle. "What does he want with us?" Council Elder Thane's voice was barely above a whisper. "We're too small to offer him anything valuable, too weak to pose any threat." "Dominance trials are about power display, not conquest," Alpha Marcus replied, but Kira could hear the uncertainty beneath his authoritative tone. "He's touring the southern territories, reminding everyone why they pay tribute to the Northern Crown. We host him for 3 days, provide appropriate entertainment, and pray he moves on without taking too much notice of our weaknesses." Beta Kane made a sound that might have been a laugh if it held any humour. "Weaknesses, Marcus, we're made of weaknesses. Our borders are barely defended, our pack numbers are pathetic, and our strongest fighter couldn't last 30 seconds against one of his war wolves. Then we make sure he never has reason to test our fighters." Alpha Marcus's pacing intensified. Perfect hospitality, no challenges to his authority, complete submission in all things. And the trials themselves? We'll hold them as tradition demands. Let our wolves compete for his entertainment, hope someone manages to not embarrass us completely, and count ourselves lucky if we survive his visit with our territory intact. The conversation continued, but Kira's attention had fragmented into white noise. Fenrir, the beast of the north, coming here, to her small and broken pack, where she scrubbed blood from arena floors and absorbed cruelties like a sponge. Something strange was happening in her chest. A flutter, like the movement of wings, accompanied by a warmth she had not felt in years. Her wolf, long silent and suppressed, was stirring for the first time since childhood. The sensation was so unexpected that she nearly dropped her cleaning brush. Why now? Why would the mention of the most feared alpha on the continent wake the part of herself she had assumed was broken beyond repair? The pack leaders were leaving now, their voices fading as they disappeared through the arena doors. Kira remained pressed against the wall, one hand unconsciously moving to her chest, where that strange warmth continued to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. "Fenrir?" she whispered to the empty arena, testing how the name felt on her tongue. Her wolf stirred again, stronger this time, and for just a moment Kira could swear she felt something impossible. Recognition. As if some part of her already knew the beast of the north, had been waiting for him without realizing it. She shook her head sharply, trying to dispel the ridiculous notion. She was cursed, broken, wolfless according to most of the pack. What could someone like her possibly have to do with a legend like Fenrir? But as she gathered her cleaning supplies and prepared to leave the arena, that warmth in her chest refused to fade. And somewhere in the deepest part of her mind, a voice that might have been her own whispered a single, impossible word. Mine. 3 days later, the earth itself seemed to tremble with his approach. Kira was in the kitchen gardens, harvesting vegetables for the welcoming feast, when the sensation began. A pressure in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. The other servants felt it too, their conversations dying as they lifted their heads to scan the horizon. Then came the sound. Howls in the distance, but not like any she had ever heard. These were calls of war, of conquest, of absolute dominance. They started as single voices and built into a chorus that made the hair on her arms stand on end. "He's coming," whispered Mira, one of the kitchen girls. Her face had gone pale, and her basket of herbs trembled in her hands. "The beast is coming." The pack began gathering in the main courtyard, drawn by instinct and Alpha Marcus's shouted commands. Kira found herself swept along with the crowd, her basket of vegetables forgotten, as she pressed forward to see what approached their territory. The war pack appeared first as shadows on the ridgeline, dark shapes moving with predatory grace against the afternoon sky. Even from a distance, their size was unmistakable. These were not ordinary wolves. They were weapons in living form, bred and trained for conquest. At their head ran a wolf so massive that Kira's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. Black as midnight, with silver markings that caught the light like blade edges. Power radiated from him in waves that she could feel even across the distance, a presence that made her knees want to buckle. The beast of the north, Fenrir, in his true form. As he drew closer, details became visible that made her breath catch. Scars across his muzzle and flanks, evidence of countless battles. Eyes like winter storms, cold and merciless. muscles that moved like coiled steel beneath his dark fur. He should have terrified her. Everything about him screamed danger, dominance, death to those who opposed him. But as Kira watched him approach, that strange warmth in her chest exploded into something that felt almost like joy. Her wolf, silent for so long, suddenly surged to the surface with desperate longing. Home, it whispered. Finally, home. The warpack reached the courtyard and shifted to human form in a display of synchronized power that left the assembled Crescent Moon wolves cowering. But Kira barely noticed the others. All her attention was locked on the figure at their centre, the man who had been the massive black wolf just moments before. Fenrir stood 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered and scarred, with black hair that fell to his shoulders and those same winter storm eyes. He wore simple leather and furs, but power clung to him like a second skin. This was not just an alpha. This was a force of nature given human shape. Alpha Marcus immediately dropped to one knee, and the rest of the pack followed suit. Kira found herself kneeling as well, but not from fear or political necessity. Something deeper than conscious thought drove her to the ground, a recognition that she was in the presence of something extraordinary. "Rise!" Fenrir commanded, and his voice was exactly what she had expected, deep as winter thunder, sharp as breaking ice. "I am here for the trials, not your submission." But as Alpha Marcus stammered through his formal welcome, Kira remained kneeling. She could not seem to make her legs obey her commands to stand. That warmth in her chest had become a roaring fire, and her wolf was going absolutely wild with emotions she could not name. Then, impossibly, those winter storm eyes found hers across the courtyard. Time stopped. Fenrir's formal expression fractured for just an instant, confusion flickering across his scarred features. His nostrils flared as if catching an unexpected scent, and his massive frame went very still. Kira felt the moment like a physical impact. Every nerve in her body suddenly sang with electric awareness, and the golden thread she had never believed in materialized between them like a visible thing. Mate. The word echoed in her head, and she did not know if it came from her wolf or from the ancient presence examining her or from him, but she knew with certainty that defied logic that her life had just changed forever. The beast of the north had found her, and somehow, impossibly, she had found him too. The full moon hung like a silver crown above the sacred grove, its light transforming the ancient trees into pillars of living starfire. Every leaf seemed to glow with inner radiance, and the very air hummed with power that spoke of ceremonies older than memory, rituals that connected the present moment to the dawn of wolfkind itself. Kira stood at the grove's heart, wearing robes that had belonged to her mother, to her grandmother, to generations of northern queens stretching back through the centuries. The fabric was silver white like moonlight on snow, embroidered with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the lunar glow. Around her throat rested not just the moonstone of Astra, but the full regalia of her bloodline, sapphire earrings that had graced Queen Morwen's ears, bracelets that had encircled the wrists of the legendary Queen Astra herself. She looked every inch the royal bride she had been born to be. The assembled witnesses filled the grove's perimeter, representatives from a dozen territories who had come to witness the mating of two of the most powerful bloodlines on the continent. Alpha Marcus knelt among them, his face a mask of reverent awe as he finally saw her as she truly was. Elder Thane stood with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, the keeper of secrets finally able to witness the fulfillment of promises made in darkness and desperation 20 years ago. But Kira had eyes only for the figure approaching through the grove's sacred heart. Fenrir moved toward her with the fluid grace of a born predator, but there was nothing of the beast in his bearing tonight. He wore the formal regalia of the Northern Crown, midnight blue velvet that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, silver threading that caught the moonlight like captured starfire. At his throat rested the Crown Prince's torque, heavy silver worked with runes that proclaimed his right to rule beside her. When their eyes met across the moonlit space, the mate bond between them flared like a struck flame, golden light visible to every witness as proof of the universe's blessing on their union. "My queen," he said as he reached her, his voice carrying across the grove with the reverence of a prayer. "My destined mate, I come before you and before these witnesses to claim what the fates themselves have decreed." "And I accept you," Kira replied, her voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "Not as conquest or prize, but as equal and partner, the other half of my soul." Elder Thane stepped forward, carrying the ceremonial blade that had sealed royal matings for 3 centuries, its silver edge gleaming in the moonlight. This was the moment that would bind them not just emotionally, but legally, creating ties that could only be severed by death itself. "The old laws require blood freely given," Thane intoned, his voice carrying the weight of ancient tradition. "Blood shared between equals, sealed beneath the witness of the moon herself." Fenrir extended his hand without hesitation, and the blade traced a shallow line across his palm. Silver blood welled from the cut, glowing with the inner light that marked him as something more than ordinary. When he offered his hand to Kira, she took it without fear, allowing their blood to mingle as their fingers intertwined. The grove exploded with light. Power rushed through the mate bond like a river breaking free of winter ice, carrying with it the accumulated strength of both their bloodlines. Kira felt herself lifted, transformed, as the full weight of the Northern Crown settled on her shoulders alongside the fierce protection of her beast. Through their joined hands flowed not just power, but knowledge, understanding, the bone-deep certainty that they were exactly what each other needed. When the light faded, when the grove returned to mere moonlit beauty instead of supernatural radiance, they stood hand in hand as something new. Not just mates, but partners in the truest sense, rulers who would reign not through dominance, but through the harmony of perfectly matched strengths. "Behold," Thane announced to the assembled witnesses, "Queen Kira of the Northern Crown and her king consort, Fenrir the Beast-Tamer. May their reign bring prosperity to all who shelter beneath their protection." The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed through the grove like thunder, but Kira barely heard them. Her attention was consumed by the storm-grey eyes of the man who was now hers in every way that mattered, bound to her by ties deeper than law or politics or even love. "How does it feel?" Fenrir asked quietly, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm where their blood had mingled. "To finally stand where you belong?" "Like coming home after being lost my entire life," Kira admitted, marvelling at how natural it felt to speak such truths aloud. "Like finally understanding why nothing else ever felt right. And now?" His voice carried undertones that made her pulse quicken, reminders that this was not just a political alliance, but the joining of true mates. "Now we have a kingdom to unite," she replied, though her own voice had gone husky with desire. "Enemies to face, a future to build that's worthy of the sacrifice our bloodlines have made." "All of that," Fenrir agreed, pulling her closer until she could feel the heat of his body through their ceremonial robes. "But first we have a wedding night to celebrate." The suggestion sent heat flooding through her veins, but it was more than simple desire. The mate bond was singing between them now, fully awakened and demanding completion in the most fundamental way possible. "The witnesses expect speeches," Kira said, though her protest was more form than substance. "The witnesses expect their queen to claim her happiness," Fenrir corrected, his lips brushing against her temple in a caress that made her breath catch. "They've waited years to see you stand where you belong. They can spare a few more hours for you to celebrate properly." As if summoned by his words, Alpha Marcus approached with a respectful bow and an expression of genuine happiness that surprised Kira with its sincerity. "Your Majesties," he said formally, "the pack offers its blessing on your union and its pledge of loyalty to your reign. We ask only that you remember us kindly when you take your rightful place on the Northern throne." "This pack will always have our protection," Kira replied, the royal authority in her voice making the promise binding. "You sheltered me when I had nothing, even if you did not know what you were protecting. That debt will be honoured." Marcus's relief was visible as he backed away with another deep bow, and similar sentiments were offered by the other territorial representatives. Each pledge of loyalty, each formal blessing, added weight to the crown that now rested invisibly on Kira's shoulders. But even as she accepted the homage due to her station, part of her remained focused on the man at her side. The mate bond pulled between them like a physical thing, growing stronger with each passing moment, until it became almost impossible to concentrate on political niceties. "Enough," Fenrir said finally, his own control clearly strained. "We have acknowledged every witness, accepted every pledge, fulfilled every tradition. Now I claim my queen for myself." Without waiting for protest, he swept Kira into his arms with the casual strength of a man who had never met his physical equal. The crowd cheered again as he carried her from the grove toward the pack house, but their voices seemed to come from a great distance. "Where are we going?" Kira asked, though she made no effort to escape his hold. "Somewhere private," Fenrir replied, his voice rough with barely restrained desire. "Somewhere we can finish what the fates started when they made us for each other." The promise in his words sent anticipation singing through her veins, but it was anticipation mixed with something deeper. This was not just about physical consummation, though her body certainly craved his touch. This was about completing the bond that would make them truly one, sealing the partnership that would reshape the political landscape of the continent. He carried her to chambers that had been prepared with obvious care, silk hangings in royal blue and silver transforming the simple room into something fit for a queen's wedding night. Candles flickered from every surface, casting dancing shadows that made the space feel intimate and sacred. When he set her gently on her feet beside the great bed, Kira felt suddenly nervous in a way she had not during the public ceremony. This was just them now, no witnesses, no political necessities, just a woman and a man discovering what it meant to be true mates. "Are you afraid?" Fenrir asked gently, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. "No," Kira replied, surprised to realize it was true. "Not afraid, just overwhelmed. Everything has changed so quickly." "Not everything," he said, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. "What we are to each other, that hasn't changed. That's been true since the moment we first looked at each other across that courtyard." The memory made her smile despite her nerves. "You were supposed to be terrifying. The beast of the north, conqueror of territories, fear made flesh. And you were supposed to be nothing, a servant, cursed and powerless." His smile matched hers, warm and wondering. The fates clearly have a sense of humour. "Or maybe they knew exactly what they were doing," Kira suggested, leaning into his touch. "Maybe they knew that neither of us would be complete without the other." "Maybe," Fenrir agreed, and then he was kissing her with all the pent-up longing of days spent fighting their attraction, weeks spent denying what they both felt, years spent waiting for someone who understood the weight they carried. The mate bond sang between them as they came together, golden light spilling through the chamber as power recognized power and chose completion over separation. This was what they had been made for, Kira realized as she lost herself in his arms. Not just to rule, not just to unite bloodlines, but to find in each other the peace that came from being truly known. When morning came, when the sun painted the chamber walls gold and silver, they lay entwined in the great bed like two parts of a match set finely fitted together. "Regrets?" Fenrir asked quietly, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. Only that it took so long to find you, Kira replied, turning to meet his storm-grey eyes with a smile that held no shadows, and that we have to leave this room eventually. We have a kingdom to claim, he reminded her, though his own reluctance was evident. We have a kingdom to build, she corrected, together as equals. Together, Fenrir agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like destiny fulfilled. Outside their chamber, the world waited for its new queen. But for a few precious hours more, they could simply be what the fates had always intended them to be. Two halves of a perfect whole, finally united at last. 3 months had passed since the mating ceremony, and the Northern Crown had never known such prosperity. Kira stood on the balcony of the great fortress that had become their seat of power, watching as the morning sun painted the valley below in shades of gold and emerald. Where once there had been scattered, fearful territories huddled behind their borders, now there was unity. Trade routes flowed freely between regions that had been enemies for generations. The weak were protected rather than preyed upon, and at the heart of it all, the partnership between Queen and King Consort had become legend. The Eastern Lord's delegation arrived this morning, Fenrir said, joining her at the balcony's edge with 2 cups of morning tea steaming in the crisp air. They're requesting an audience. Kira accepted the cup with a smile that held no warmth for their enemies, but infinite affection for her mate. Let me guess, they want to negotiate terms for their surrender? More likely they want to assess our weaknesses before launching their next assault, Fenrir replied, though his tone carried the confidence of a man who had never lost a battle he truly cared about winning. 3 months of watching their carefully laid plans crumble has made them desperate. The Eastern Lord's conspiracy had indeed unravelled with spectacular efficiency once Kira claimed her throne. Territories that had been coerced into supporting their bid for power switched allegiance to the legitimate queen. The dark magic practitioners they had cultivated found themselves outmatched by the pure strength of royal bloodline. Most telling of all, their network of spies and assassins had melted away like snow before spring once word spread that the beast of the north protected his queen with lethal devotion. They underestimated us, Kira observed, sipping her tea while watching a group of children play in the courtyard below. Former enemies' children, now growing up together in peace. They saw a broken servant girl and a brutally efficient conqueror. They never imagined what we could become together. Can you blame them? Fenrir's arm came around her waist, pulling her against his warmth with the casual possessiveness of a mate completely secure in his bond. I barely believed it myself until I saw you stand against Seraphina in that arena. The memory made them both smile. Reports had reached them that Seraphina had made it back to the Eastern Territories, but the corruption that had fueled her borrowed power was consuming her from within. She would not live to see another winter, and her death would serve as a warning to others who might consider trafficking with forces beyond mortal understanding. "Your Majesties," came a respectful voice from the balcony doorway. Captain Aldrich, formerly a minor knight in Marcus's guard, had risen to become their most trusted military adviser. His loyalty had been earned through competence and unwavering integrity rather than birth or political connection. The Eastern delegation is assembled in the Great Hall. They seem agitated. Agitated is an interesting way to describe men who are about to lose everything they schemed to steal, Kira noted, setting down her teacup with deliberate care. Very well, let's not keep them waiting. The great hall of the Northern Crown's seat was a masterwork of architectural intimidation. Soaring stone arches supported a ceiling painted with the deeds of legendary queens, while banners bearing the symbols of allied territories created a display of unified power that had never been seen in the continent's history. At the hall's far end, 2 thrones sat side by side on a dais of black marble, one for the queen, one for her king consort, equal in height and magnificence. But it was not the grandeur of the setting that made the Eastern delegation shift nervously as Kira and Fenrir entered. It was the presence they brought with them, the aura of absolute authority that had grown stronger with each month of successful rule. Lord Cassius of the Eastern Reach led the delegation, a man whose ambition had always exceeded his wisdom. He wore rich robes and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. Today, he looked like a man who had suddenly realized he was surrounded by apex predators. "Your Majesties," he said with a bow that managed to be technically correct while conveying no actual respect. "We come seeking dialogue, hoping to resolve the misunderstandings that have arisen between our territories." "Misunderstandings," Kira repeated, settling onto her throne with fluid grace, while Fenrir took his place beside her. "Is that what you call 20 years of conspiracy, assassination attempts, and the corruption of pack bonds for political gain?" Lord Cassius's composure flickered, but he rallied quickly. "The actions of rogue agents do not reflect the will of the Eastern Reach as a whole. Seraphina acted without our knowledge or sanction." "Did she?" Fenrir's voice carried the cold promise of winter storms, and several members of the delegation actually took a step backward. "Because our intelligence suggests otherwise. Would you like us to share what we've learned about your involvement in the deaths of Princess Lyanna and her mate?" The accusation hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Lord Cassius's face went pale, but he managed to maintain his diplomatic facade. "Wild accusations without proof serve no one, Your Majesty. We come here in good faith, seeking peace between our peoples." "Peace." Kira let the word roll off her tongue like something distasteful. "You want peace now that your schemes have failed, your agents are dead or fled, and your allies have abandoned you. How convenient." She rose from her throne, and the simple movement carried such authority that every person in the hall felt compelled to straighten in response. "I will give you peace, Lord Cassius, the peace of knowing exactly where you stand." Her voice carried to every corner of the great hall, ensuring that witnesses would spread her words far and wide. "The Eastern Reach will submit to the authority of the Northern Crown. Your territories will be governed by representatives of my choosing. Your military forces will be disbanded and reformed under commanders loyal to this throne. And you, personally, will spend the remainder of your life under guard in accommodations suited to your new station as a prisoner of war." The terms were harsh but not unreasonable given the scope of their crimes. Lord Cassius opened his mouth to protest, but Fenrir's low growl cut off whatever diplomatic objection he might have offered. "You have one alternative," Kira continued, her tone suggesting she considered it unlikely to be chosen. "Trial by combat. Choose your champion, and if they can defeat mine in honourable battle, I will consider more generous terms." Lord Cassius looked around the great hall, taking in the assembled witnesses, the banners of allied territories, the obvious prosperity of a kingdom united under competent leadership. Whatever champion he might have brought would face not just a warrior, but the rightful queen of the Northern Crown, fighting to protect everything she had built. "We require time to consider your terms," he said finally, his diplomatic training warring with the reality of complete defeat. "You have until sunset," Kira replied. "Captain Aldrich will see that you have comfortable quarters for your deliberations." As the Eastern delegation was escorted from the hall, Fenrir leaned over to murmur in her ear, "Generous of you to give them a choice." "Generous would have been allowing them to keep their heads," Kira replied with a smile that held sharp edges. "I learned from the best that mercy without strength is meaningless, but strength without mercy is tyranny." The afternoon brought reports from across their territories, trade flourishing, former enemies working together on infrastructure projects, children from different packs playing together without regard for old prejudices. Every messenger who arrived brought further evidence that their united rule was creating something unprecedented in the continent's history. "Your Majesty!" announced a young courier who had ridden hard from the southern borders. "News from the Crescent Moon territory? Luna Sarah has given birth to twin daughters, and Alpha Marcus requests your presence at their naming ceremony." The invitation filled Kira with unexpected warmth. Sarah was the former kitchen maid Mira, who had married well and proven herself a capable leader. The fact that she wanted her former queen present for such a personal celebration spoke to bonds that transcended politics. "Send word that we would be honoured to attend," Kira instructed, "and prepare gifts worthy of the occasion." As sunset approached, Captain Aldrich returned with the Eastern delegation's answer. Lord Cassius and his supporters had chosen submission over the uncertainty of combat, recognising that their position was hopeless. "They accept your terms, Your Majesty," Aldrich reported. "Unconditional surrender, with yourself as their sovereign and protector." "Then let it be recorded," Kira declared. "The Eastern Reach is hereby incorporated into the Northern Crown's dominion. Their people will be governed justly, their needs provided for, and their futures secured through unity rather than division." That evening, as they stood once again on their private balcony, watching the sun set over territories that had never known such peace, Fenrir pulled Kira close against his chest. "Any regrets about the path we've taken?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Only that we can't go back and spare ourselves those years of separation and misunderstanding," Kira replied, leaning into his strength. "Though perhaps we needed those experiences to become who we are now." "Perhaps," he agreed. "I know I needed to learn what it meant to be more than just the beast before I could be worthy of standing beside a queen." Kira turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to frame his scarred features. "You were always worthy. You just needed someone to see past the legend to the man underneath." Their kiss was soft and tender, filled with the contentment of partners who had found their perfect match. When they separated, Kira rested her forehead against his and smiled. "I have news," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of wonder that made his breath catch. "What kind of news?" Instead of answering with words, Kira took his hand and placed it gently over her still flat abdomen. The moment his palm made contact, his enhanced senses caught what she had discovered that morning, the faint but unmistakable scent of new life beginning. Fenrir's eyes went wide with shock and joy and something that might have been reverence. "Are you certain?" "The royal physician confirmed it this afternoon," Kira replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "The next generation of the Northern Crown is already growing." The news hit Fenrir like a physical blow, driving him to his knees on the balcony stones as the magnitude of what she was telling him fully registered. Their child, the heir who would inherit both bloodlines, both legacies, both the fierce protection of the beast and the compassionate strength of the queen. "My love," he whispered, his hands covering hers where they rested over their growing child. "My queen, my everything." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky above their kingdom, Kira looked down at the man who had travelled from legend to become her partner in all things. The servant girl who had once scrubbed floors and absorbed cruelties was gone forever, replaced by a woman who ruled with wisdom and love, and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to build something lasting and good. But tonight, surrounded by peace and prosperity and the promise of future generations, Kira allowed herself to simply be happy. The Northern Crown had found its queen at last, and she had found her home. The nursery was bathed in the soft light of dawn, pale gold streaming through windows that looked out over the kingdom they had built together. Kira sat in the rocking chair that had been carved from ancient oak, her 6-month-old daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms while she watched her mate with wonder that had not dimmed in the months since their child's birth. Fenrir knelt on the thick carpet beside them, his massive frame folded with infinite care as he traced gentle patterns on their daughter's tiny hand. The contrast still amazed her. The beast of the north, conqueror of territories and terror of armies, reduced to helpless devotion by 10 pounds of silver-haired perfection who had inherited her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn determination. "She's going to be trouble," he murmured, his voice soft with the kind of love that transformed even the most hardened warriors. "Look at that expression. She's already planning something." Princess Liana, named for her grandmother and carrying the hopes of 2 bloodlines, stirred in her sleep as if she heard him. Her tiny fist wrapped around his finger with surprising strength, and even in slumber her grip conveyed the same authority that had marked royal children for generations. "She's going to be extraordinary," Kira corrected, brushing a kiss across her daughter's downy head. "Strong enough to protect those who need protecting, wise enough to know when mercy matters more than might. Everything we dreamed of when we first imagined the future." The kingdom beyond their private chambers was thriving under their joint rule. The Eastern Territories had integrated smoothly into their expanding realm, their former enemies now among their most loyal subjects. Trade routes that had been closed for generations carried prosperity to the furthest borders. Children who should have grown up as enemies played together in courtyards where their parents conducted the business of a united realm. But it was here, in the quiet moments before the world intruded with its demands and responsibilities, that Kira felt the deepest satisfaction. Not in the throne room where she dispensed justice, not in the council chambers where they planned the kingdom's future, but here where the beast of the north became simply the father of her child. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night in the kitchen?" she asked quietly, careful not to wake their sleeping daughter. "About not wanting to mate with weakness?" Fenrir's storm-grey eyes found hers, and she saw memory and regret and infinite tenderness in their depths. "I remember being a fool who mistook gentleness for frailty." "You weren't a fool. You were a man who had learned that survival meant never showing vulnerability." Kira's free hand found his cheek, tracing the familiar scars that told the story of battles fought and survived. "But you learned the difference, didn't you, between weakness and strength tempered by compassion?" "You taught me," he said simply. "Every day, in every choice you make as queen, you showed me that true strength isn't about dominating others, it's about lifting them up." The words warmed her more than any formal declaration of love ever could. This was what they had built together, not just a kingdom, but a partnership that had transformed them both into better versions of themselves. Princess Liana stirred again, her silver eyes opening to focus on her parents with the solemn intensity that marked her as her mother's daughter. When she reached toward Fenrir's face with one tiny hand, he leaned down to let her explore the texture of his beard with scientific curiosity. "What do you see when you look at her?" Kira asked, watching their daughter discover the world through touch and wonder. "The future," Fenrir replied without hesitation. "Everything we've built, everything we've dreamed of, given form and breath and the chance to grow into something even better than we could imagine. And when you look at us, at what we've become together?" Fenrir was quiet for a long moment, his attention seemingly focused on their daughter's exploration of his features. But Kira could feel the emotion building through their bond, the depth of feeling that still sometimes overwhelmed him with its intensity. "I see the miracle of finding home in another person," he said finally. "I spent my whole life believing that power was something you took from others, that strength meant standing alone against the world. Then you touched my hand in that kitchen and showed me that real power comes from what you build with someone who sees your soul and chooses to stay anyway." The confession hung between them like a sacred thing, testament to the journey that had brought them from that first moment of recognition in a courtyard filled with cowering wolves to this quiet dawn in their daughter's nursery. "I was so afraid," Kira admitted, shifting the baby to her shoulder where she could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing. "When I first realized what you were to me, what the bond meant, I thought you would see me as a burden, a weakness to be exploited by your enemies. And instead you saw me as I truly was, Not the broken servant everyone else dismissed, not the hidden princess everyone wanted to use, but just me, the woman who needed you as much as you needed her. Fenrir rose from his knees to settle on the arm of her rocking chair, his presence warm and solid against her side. Together they watched their daughter discover the world with fearless curiosity, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and protected and destined for greatness. "She'll never know what it feels like to be powerless," Kira observed, wonder colouring her voice. "Never have to scrub floors while others mock her worth, never have to hide what she is out of fear." "She'll have different challenges," Fenrir said pragmatically. "The weight of a crown, the responsibility of ruling justly, the burden of living up to the legend her parents have become. But she'll never have to face them alone." Kira leaned into his warmth, drawing strength from the bond that had become the foundation of everything they had built. "She'll have parents who understand the cost of power and the value of compassion. A kingdom united by love rather than fear. A legacy worth inheriting." Princess Lyanna chose that moment to release a tiny yawn, her perfect features scrunching with the effort before settling back into peaceful slumber. The sight filled Kira with such fierce protectiveness that she almost laughed at the intensity of it. "I would burn the world before I let anyone harm her," she said quietly. "As would I," Fenrir agreed, his own voice carrying the promise of winter storms. "But that's not the legacy we want to leave her, is it? A world ruled by fear and domination? No." Kira's smile was soft but determined. "We want to leave her a world where strength is measured by how well you protect those who can't protect themselves, where power is shared rather than hoarded, where love conquers fear every single time." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the nursery in shades of gold and possibility. Soon the world would intrude with its demands, council meetings and diplomatic correspondence, territorial disputes and trade negotiations. The crown was never a burden that could be set aside, not even for the precious hours spent with their daughter. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of their family's most private space, they were simply what they had always been meant to be, two halves of a perfect whole, completed by the miracle of the child they had created together. "What are you thinking?" Fenrir asked, sensing the shift in her mood through their bond. "I'm thinking about that night in the sacred grove," Kira replied, her voice soft with memory. "When you told me that choosing me over duty would make you weak. And you proved me wrong in every way that mattered." "We proved each other wrong," she corrected. "You thought I was too gentle to be a true partner. I thought you were too hard to understand love. But we were both exactly what the other needed, weren't we?" "Perfectly matched," Fenrir agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple that conveyed 3 lifetimes' worth of devotion. "The universe knew what it was doing when it made us mates." Princess Lyanna stirred again, her tiny hand reaching toward the window where morning light danced with dust motes like captured starfire. Even at 6 months old, she seemed drawn to beauty and light, as if she understood instinctively that the world was hers to explore and cherish. "She's going to change everything," Kira said with quiet certainty. "This next generation, raised without the prejudices and fears that shaped us. They'll build something even better than what we've created." "Good," Fenrir said simply. "That's how it should be, each generation standing on the shoulders of the last, reaching higher than their parents ever dreamed possible." As if in response to his words, Princess Lyanna opened her silver eyes and looked directly at her parents with an expression that seemed far too knowing for an infant. In that gaze, Kira saw echoes of all the queens who had come before and shadows of all the queens yet to come. "I love you," she said quietly, the words encompassing not just Fenrir, but their daughter, their kingdom, the entire impossible miracle of the life they had built from the ashes of loneliness and fear. "And I love you," Fenrir replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. My queen, my mate, my heart walking around outside my body in the form of two perfect females who own my soul completely. The declaration made Kira laugh, joy bubbling up from the deepest well of contentment she had ever known. This was happiness, she realized. Not the fleeting pleasure of small victories or temporary comfort, but the bone-deep satisfaction of being exactly where she belonged with exactly the right people. Outside their window, the kingdom stretched toward the horizon, under a sky painted with the promise of a perfect day. Inside their sanctuary, the beast of the north held his greatest treasures close and marvelled at the journey that had brought him from conquest to love, from loneliness to belonging, from the cold satisfaction of power taken to the warm joy of power shared. When Princess Liana finally drifted back to sleep, secure in the circle of her parents' love, Kira closed her own eyes and let herself simply exist in the moment. No past filled with pain and dismissal, no future weighted with responsibility and difficult choices. Just this, the perfect present, where a servant girl who had become a queen rocked her daughter to sleep, while the most feared wolf on the continent whispered lullabies against their joined foreheads. It was, Kira thought drowsily, exactly the kind of ending that proved love could indeed transform even the most impossible circumstances into something beautiful. The beast had finally found his peace, and his queen had finally found her home. The silence stretched like a blade between them. Fenrir stood motionless in the centre of the courtyard, his winter storm eyes locked on Kira with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Around them, the entire pack held their breath, sensing something monumental was occurring, but not daring to understand what. Alpha Marcus cleared his throat nervously, the sound sharp in the unnatural quiet. "My lord, if there's anything—" "Silence!" The single word from Fenrir cut through the attempted interruption like a sword through silk. He had not looked away from Kira, had not even blinked, and she found herself drowning in that storm-grey gaze. Her wolf was clawing at the barriers of her consciousness, desperate and wild with recognition. This was him. This was the one they had waited for, without knowing they were waiting. The other half of their soul, standing 20 feet away and radiating power like heat from a forge. But that was impossible. She was nothing. Cursed, wolfless according to half the pack. What could the beast of the north possibly want with someone like her? Fenrir took a single step forward, and several pack members actually whimpered. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had held him frozen, and his attention finally shifted away from Kira to sweep across the assembled wolves. "I require quarters," he said, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard, despite its measured tone. "Somewhere private, and food for my pack." "Of course, my lord." Alpha Marcus scrambled to his feet, relief evident in every line of his body, now that those terrible eyes were no longer focused on him. "We've prepared our finest guest chambers for you, and the kitchen has been working since dawn to prepare a feast worthy of your presence." Fenrir nodded once, a sharp jerk of his chin that somehow managed to convey both acknowledgement and dismissal. His warwolves began moving with silent efficiency, scattering to secure the territory's perimeter and establish their temporary dominance over the space. Kira remained on her knees, unable to trust her legs to hold her if she tried to stand. The golden thread she had felt between them was still there, humming with an energy that made her skin feel too tight for her body. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to go to him, to close the distance between them and discover what this impossible connection meant. Instead, she watched as he turned away and followed Alpha Marcus toward the pack house, his massive frame moving with the predatory grace of a natural killer. He did not look back at her, but she could swear she felt his awareness like a weight against her skin. "What was that about?" Mira whispered, suddenly appearing at Kira's side. The kitchen girl's face was pale with confused fear. "Why did he stare at you like that?" Kira had no answer. She pushed herself to her feet on shaking legs, brushing dirt from her worn dress with hands that trembled. I don't know. But that was a lie. Deep in her bones, in the parts of herself she kept carefully hidden, she knew exactly what had happened. The mate bond, thing of legend and fairy tales, had snapped into place between her and the most dangerous alpha on the continent. It should have been impossible. It should have been a dream, a delusion brought on by too many years of abuse and isolation. But her wolf knew the truth, and her wolf did not lie. The beast of the north was her mate, and she was absolutely terrified. The feast that evening was a display of nervous excess, with Alpha Marcus clearly trying to impress through sheer volume of offerings. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh breads, seasonal vegetables, and the pack's finest wines. Every candle in the territory seemed to be burning, casting the great hall in warm golden light that should have felt welcoming. Instead, the atmosphere was thick with barely contained terror. Fenrir sat at the head table in the place of honour, but his presence seemed to drain the warmth from the entire room. Conversations died when his attention shifted toward them. Laughter became forced and hollow when he was near enough to hear it. Kira worked among the other servants, carrying platters and refilling goblets while trying to remain invisible. It was a skill she had perfected over the years, the ability to move through spaces without being noticed or remembered. Tonight, that skill felt like armour against the overwhelming awareness that prickled along her skin every time she sensed his gaze, because he was watching her. Not obviously, not in a way that would draw attention from the other pack members, but she could feel his eyes tracking her movement around the hall. Every time she emerged from the kitchen with another course, every time she leaned across a table to pour wine, every time she bent to clear away empty plates. The attention should have terrified her. This was the beast of the north, the Alpha King whose reputation for cruelty stretched across the continent. But instead of fear, that golden thread between them hummed with something that felt dangerously like anticipation. "Seraphina!" Alpha Marcus called out suddenly, his voice pitched to carry across the hall. "Come, present yourself to our honoured guest." The pack's most eligible she-wolf rose from her seat with practised grace, her golden hair catching the candlelight and her blue silk dress emphasising every curve of her perfect figure. Seraphina was everything Kira was not, beautiful, confident, well-bred, and utterly convinced of her own worth. She moved toward the head table with the fluid grace of a born seductress, her smile warm and inviting as she offered a respectful bow that somehow still managed to display her assets to their best advantage. "My Lord Fenrir," she purred, her voice like honey over steel. "I am Seraphina Blackwood, daughter of the late Alpha Blackwood and the finest unmated she-wolf in Crescent Moon territory." Fenrir's expression did not change, but Kira caught the way his nostrils flared slightly, testing Seraphina's scent. Around the hall, pack members watched with barely concealed hope. If their prize female could catch the beast's interest, it might mean protection, alliance, elevation from their current insignificant status. "Blackwood," Fenrir repeated, his voice giving nothing away. "I knew your father. He died with honour." "Thank you, my lord." Seraphina's smile widened, taking the acknowledgement as encouragement. "I would be honoured to show you the territory's finest hunting grounds while you're here, or perhaps you would enjoy other entertainments I could provide." The offer hung in the air like smoke, its implications clear to everyone present. Seraphina was offering herself as his temporary companion, his entertainment during his stay, and given her bloodline and beauty, it was not an unreasonable offer. Fenrir studied her for a long moment, his storm-grey eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts. Kira found herself holding her breath, her hands clenched so tightly around the wine pitcher she carried that her knuckles had gone white. "Perhaps," he said finally, and the single word sent a spike of something that felt like agony through Kira's chest. Seraphina's triumphant smile was radiant. "I am at your service, my lord, in all things." Kira turned away before she could see more, fleeing toward the kitchen with the excuse of retrieving another course. But she could not escape the images her mind conjured, the thought of Seraphina's perfect hands on Fenrir's scarred skin, of those full lips pressed against his throat while he held her close. The golden thread between them pulsed with what felt like physical pain, and Kira pressed one hand to her chest, trying to ease the ache. This was why the mate bond was considered sacred, she realized, because it made rejection feel like dying. In the kitchen, she leaned against the stone counter and fought to control her breathing. She had no claim on Fenrir, no right to feel possessive or hurt. She was a servant, cursed and broken, while he was an alpha king who could have anyone he desired. Of course he would choose someone like Seraphina over someone like her. "You look ill," observed a quiet voice from the shadows. Kira spun around to find Elder Thane watching her with knowing eyes. The old wolf was one of the few pack members who had never been openly cruel to her, though he had never been particularly kind either. He simply existed on the periphery of pack politics, offering wisdom when asked and keeping his own counsel otherwise. "I'm fine, Elder," she managed, though her voice sounded strained even to her own ears. "Are you?" He stepped closer, and she caught something strange in his expression. Not pity exactly, but a kind of resigned sadness that made her skin crawl with apprehension. "Tell me, child, what do you know of your mother's family?" The question was so unexpected that Kira blinked in confusion. "Nothing. My parents died when I was 12. They never spoke of family beyond each other." "Your mother never told you stories of the Northern Territories? Never mentioned why she chose exile over her birthright?" "Elder Thane, I don't understand." "Your mother was Luna Lyanna Grey, formerly Princess Lyanna of the Northern bloodline." The words hit Kira like physical blows, each one impossible to process. She was born to rule the Northern Crown, but she chose love over duty when she mated with your father and fled south to escape an arranged marriage. The wine pitcher slipped from Kira's nerveless fingers, shattering against the stone floor in an explosion of clay and wine that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I would know, I would feel it. There would be some sign—" There was. Thane's voice was infinitely gentle now, as if he understood the magnitude of what he was revealing. "A suppression spell cast by your mother to hide your scent and your power until you came of age. She wanted you to have a choice she never had, the chance to live as a normal wolf if that was what you desired." Kira's legs gave out, and she found herself sitting hard on the kitchen floor among the broken pottery and spilled wine. "You're lying." "I wish I were, child." Thane crouched down beside her, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her to a nearby stool. "Your mother made me promise to tell you the truth if certain conditions were met. The arrival of your mate was one of those conditions." "My mate?" The words felt foreign on her tongue. "The beast of the north. Your wolf recognizes him because your bloodlines are compatible, because the Northern Crown has been waiting for its lost princess to return." Thane's expression was grave as he studied her face. "The suppression spell is breaking down, Kira. Being near him is accelerating the process. Soon, everyone will know what you truly are." Before Kira could respond, before she could even begin to process the implications of what she had just learned, the kitchen door burst open. Fenrir stood in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space and his eyes blazing with something that looked like barely controlled fury. "You," he growled, his gaze locked on Kira with laser intensity. "Come with me, now." Elder Thane immediately dropped his head in submission, but his eyes found Kira's one last time before he melted back into the shadows. "Choose carefully, Princess," he whispered, too quiet for anyone but her enhanced hearing to catch. "Some choices cannot be undone." Fenrir extended one scarred hand toward her, and Kira stared at it as if it might be a trap. Everything in her world had just shifted on its axis, and now the beast of the north was demanding her attention with the force of absolute command. She looked up into those storm-grey eyes and saw something that made her breath catch. Recognition. as if he, too, had felt the golden thread between them and was as confused by it as she was. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, she placed her hand in his. The moment their skin made contact, the world exploded into golden light. The golden light faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Kira gasping and disoriented in the sudden return to ordinary reality. But the sensation of Fenrir's hand wrapped around hers remained, calloused skin warm against her palm and sending electric shocks up her arm with every heartbeat. He was staring down at their joined hands with an expression she could not read, his storm-grey eyes dark with something that might have been confusion or fury or both. When he looked up at her face, she saw a flicker of vulnerability so brief she might have imagined it. "What are you?" he asked quietly, his voice stripped of the commanding authority that had filled the great hall. Here in the kitchen, surrounded by broken pottery and spilled wine, he sounded almost human. "I don't know," Kira whispered, and it was the truth. Everything she had believed about herself had shattered in the span of minutes, leaving her adrift in a reality she did not understand. Fenrir's grip on her hand tightened, not painfully, but with unmistakable possession. "Your scent is wrong, layered, as if someone has been hiding what you truly are." "The suppression spell," she said without thinking, then immediately wished she could take the words back, but it was too late. His eyes sharpened with predatory interest. "Explain." The command was soft but absolute, and Kira found herself unable to refuse. "Elder Thane says my mother cast a spell to hide my bloodline, to give me a choice about my future." "Your bloodline." Fenrir repeated the words as if they tasted strange. "What bloodline requires hiding?" Kira's mouth went dry. She could not say it, could not speak the words that would change everything between them. Because once he knew what she supposedly was, he would either claim her for political advantage or kill her to prevent her from threatening his rule. "Tell me," he said again, and this time she heard the edge of the beast creeping into his voice. "Northern Princess," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Thane claims I'm the lost daughter of Princess Lyanna." The effect was immediate and devastating. Fenrir dropped her hand as if it had caught fire, taking several steps back with his eyes blazing silver. The careful control he had maintained since his arrival finally cracked, revealing the predator beneath the civilized facade. Impossible." The word was a growl, deep and dangerous. "Princess Lyanna died in exile 20 years ago. She had no children." "She had me." Kira's voice was steadier now, some inner strength rising to meet his aggression. "Then she died defending this territory, along with my father. Even if that were true, even if you carried northern blood, you're nothing." His words cut like blades, each one designed to wound. "A servant, powerless. I can smell the weakness on you." Something shifted inside Kira at the deliberate cruelty, a spark of defiance she had thought long dead. "Then why did you feel it too, when we touched?" Fenrir went very still. Around them, the kitchen seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his response. "I felt nothing," he said finally, but the lie was obvious even to her inexperienced senses. "You felt the same golden light I did, the same recognition." Kira took a step toward him, drawn by an instinct she did not understand. "Your wolf knows mine, just like mine knows yours. My wolf recognizes nothing but strength." But even as he spoke the denial, she could see the conflict in his eyes. "And you have none." "Don't I?" The question surprised them both. Kira had never challenged anyone in her life, had spent years perfecting the art of submission and invisibility. But standing here with the mate bond humming between them, she found courage she had never known she possessed. Fenrir's expression darkened further. "You think royal blood makes you strong? You think a hidden bloodline gives you power?" He moved closer, using his size to intimidate, to remind her of exactly how outmatched she was. I have conquered 12 territories. I have killed alphas with my bare hands. What have you done besides scrub floors and absorb insults? Each word was designed to break her, to force her back into the submissive role she had always played. But instead of cowering, Kira felt that spark of defiance flare brighter. I survived, she said quietly. I survived 5 years of being your pack's scapegoat. I survived losing my parents and having no one. I survived believing I was worthless and still getting up every morning to face another day of cruelty. Her voice grew stronger with each word. Maybe that doesn't impress the beast of the north, but it's more than nothing. Something flickered across his scarred features, there and gone too quickly to identify. For a moment she thought she had reached him, had found some crack in his armour of controlled brutality. Then his expression hardened again, becoming the mask of cold authority she had witnessed in the great hall. Survival is not strength, he said with devastating finality, and I do not mate with weakness. The words hit her like physical blows, driving the breath from her lungs and sending cracks through the fragile hope that had been building in her chest. Of course he would reject her. What had she expected? That the most powerful alpha on the continent would want someone like her? I never said I wanted you to, she managed, pride demanding she salvage something from this humiliation. Good. But there was something in his voice that contradicted the dismissal, a roughness that suggested the rejection cost him something too. Then we understand each other. He turned to leave, and panic flared in Kira's chest. Whatever this connection between them was, whatever it meant, she could not let it end like this. Not with cruelty and denial and the taste of shame in her mouth. Wait. The word escaped before she could stop it. Fenrir paused in the doorway, but did not turn around. What? The scars on your hands, she said, her voice barely steady. They're not from battle. Now he did turn, his eyes dangerous. What did you say? Kira's heart was hammering against her ribs, but she forced herself to continue. The scars on your hands, they're too precise, too deliberate. Someone did that to you on purpose. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. When Fenrir finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. You see too much. Maybe. Kira met his gaze without flinching, drawing on reserves of courage she had not known she possessed. Or maybe I recognize pain when I see it. For a long moment they stared at each other across the kitchen. Kira could see the war being fought behind his storm-grey eyes, the battle between the beast who trusted no one and something deeper that responded to her words with unwilling recognition. Finally he spoke. What do you want from me? The question was so unexpected that Kira blinked in surprise. I don't want anything. Everyone wants something. Power, protection, status, wealth. His voice was harsh with cynicism. What's your price? I don't have one. The truth of it surprised her. I never expected anything from anyone. Why would I start now? Something in his expression shifted, the predatory intensity giving way to something that looked almost like confusion. Then what are you doing? Kira considered the question, trying to find words for the impossible thing that was happening between them. I'm trying to understand why my wolf recognizes yours. Why touching you felt like coming home after being lost my entire life. Why the mate bond chose someone like me for someone like you. There is no mate bond. But the denial lacked conviction now, and they both knew it. Isn't there? Kira took another step toward him, and she saw his muscles tense as if he were preparing to flee or fight. Then why are you still here? Why didn't you leave the moment I told you about the bloodline? Fenrir's jaw clenched, and she could see the pulse beating rapidly at the base of his throat. Because I needed to determine if you posed a threat. And do I? The question was barely a whisper. Their eyes met and held, and Kira saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Not the cold calculation of a conqueror, but something raw and desperate and achingly vulnerable. Yes, he said finally, his voice rough with admission. "You're the most dangerous thing I've ever encountered." Before she could ask what he meant, before she could process the implications of his words, he was gone. The kitchen door swung shut behind him with brutal finality, leaving Kira alone with her shattered world and the echo of golden light that still pulsed between her ribs. She sank back onto the stool, her legs unable to support her weight any longer. Everything had changed in the span of minutes. Her identity, her bloodline, her understanding of her own worth. And somewhere in the middle of all that upheaval, she had found the mate the universe had chosen for her. The mate who had just rejected her with words designed to destroy. But as Kira sat in the wreckage of the kitchen, surrounded by broken pottery and the lingering scent of winter storms, she could not shake the memory of that final look in his eyes. Not rejection, not dismissal, fear. The beast of the north was afraid of her, and somehow that changed everything. The morning brought news that shattered what remained of Kira's fragile hope. She was in the laundry quarters, her hands deep in soapy water as she scrubbed linens for the guest rooms, when Mira burst through the door with eyes bright with gossip and excitement. "Did you hear?" the kitchen girl gasped, practically vibrating with the need to share her news. "Serafina made her formal offer last night." Kira's hands stilled in the wash basin, soap bubbles clinging to her fingers like tiny pearls. "What offer?" "A mating alliance." Mira's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were sharing state secrets instead of pack gossip. She went to his chambers after the feast and proposed a union between their bloodlines. Her beauty and breeding combined with his power and territory. The words hit Kira like physical blows, each one driving deeper into the wound that Fenrir's rejection had already torn open. She forced her expression to remain neutral, schooling her features into the mask of indifference she had perfected over years of abuse. "And?" The single word scraped her throat raw. "He's considering it!" Mira could barely contain her glee. "Can you imagine our little pack allied with the beast of the north through Serafina's womb? We'd be untouchable." Kira turned back to the washing, using the mechanical motions to anchor herself against the storm of emotion threatening to tear her apart. Of course he was considering it. Serafina was everything a powerful alpha should want: beautiful, well-bred, politically advantageous. She would give him strong airs and elegant companionship without the complication of genuine feeling. What could Kira offer that could possibly compete with that? A hidden bloodline she could not prove, a suppressed wolf she could barely feel, the pathetic devotion of someone he had already dismissed as worthless? "Alpha Marcus is beside himself with joy," Mira continued, oblivious to Kira's internal devastation. "He's already planning the ceremony. 3 days hence, if the beast agrees. Can you imagine the celebration?" 3 days. Kira's hands clenched around the wet fabric she was washing, her knuckles going white with the force of her grip. In 3 days, Fenrir would bind himself to another woman, and the golden thread between them would be severed forever. The laundry room door opened again, and this time it was not Mira's excited chatter that filled the space. Elder Thane entered quietly, his weathered face grave as he took in Kira's rigid posture and carefully blank expression. "Leave us," he said to Mira, and something in his tone brooked no argument. The kitchen girl scurried away, her disappointment at being dismissed obvious but not strong enough to overcome her fear of the pack's most senior member. When they were alone, Thane approached the wash basin where Kira continued her mechanical scrubbing. "You heard about the proposed alliance?" It was not a question. Kira nodded once, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "Child," Thane said gently, "there are things you need to know about your mother, about the choices she made and why she made them. It doesn't matter now." Kira's voice was flat, empty of the pain that was eating her alive from the inside. "He's made his decision." "Has he?" Thane moved closer, lowering his voice to ensure they would not be overheard. "Or is he simply doing what he believes he must to protect his territories and his people?" Kira finally looked up from the washing, meeting the elder's knowing eyes. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother was betrothed to the previous Northern king," Thane explained, his voice heavy with old sorrow. "A political alliance meant to unite the Northern and Eastern territories under one crown. She was 17, beautiful, and utterly terrified of spending her life with a man she had never met and could never love. So she ran away." The story was not unfamiliar. Kira had heard whispered versions of it throughout her childhood, tales of the cowardly princess who abandoned her duty for selfish desire. "She ran toward love," Thane corrected gently. "She met your father during a diplomatic mission to the Southern Territories. One look, one conversation, and she knew she had found her true mate. The bond was so strong that even the Northern King's advisors could not deny its authenticity." Kira's hands had gone still in the washwater again. "But she still left her responsibilities behind." "She made a choice between duty and destiny," Thane said, "and she paid the price for it every day of her exile. Do you know why she cast the suppression spell on you?" "To give me a choice." Kira repeated the explanation he had given her the night before. "Partly, but also to protect you from the same impossible decision she had faced." Thane's expression grew pained. "She knew that if your bloodline were revealed, you would be forced into political arrangements that had nothing to do with your happiness or your heart's desire. She wanted you to have the chance to find your own path." "My path?" Kira let out a bitter laugh. "My path is scrubbing floors and absorbing cruelties from people who think I'm cursed. What kind of choice is that?" "The choice to be more than what others expect of you." Thane reached into his robes and withdrew something that made Kira's breath catch. A pendant, silver and ancient, carved with symbols she did not recognize, but that her wolf responded to with instant recognition. "This was your mother's, and her mother's before her. It has been passed down through the female line of the Northern royal family for 300 years. The pendant seemed to pulse with its own inner light, and as Thane held it out to her, Kira could feel power radiating from the metal, like heat from a forge. "I can't," she whispered, her hands trembling as she pulled them from the washwater. "I'm not worthy of something like that." "Aren't you?" Thane's voice was infinitely gentle. "You are the daughter of Princess Lyanna, the granddaughter of Queen Morwen, the great-granddaughter of the legendary Queen Astra, who first united the northern clans. Their blood flows in your veins, their strength lives in your bones. The suppression spell may have hidden your scent, but it could not change what you are." "But Fenrir—" "Is a man torn between his heart and his perceived duties," Thane interrupted. "He feels the mate bond as strongly as you do, child, but he also carries the weight of an empire on his shoulders. He believes that choosing his mate over political advantage would make him weak, vulnerable to the enemies who already circle his territories like vultures. Then he's right to choose Seraphina." The words tasted like ash in Kira's mouth. "She can give him the alliance he needs." "Can she?" Thane's eyes glittered with something that looked almost like amusement. "Tell me, what do you know of Seraphina's true loyalties?" The question caught Kira off guard. "I don't understand." Her father, Alpha Blackwood, was known for his ambition. Before his death, he made several attempts to expand his territory through strategic alliances and, when those failed, through more direct means. Thane leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There are rumours that Seraphina inherited more than just his beauty and his bloodline." "What kind of rumours?" "The kind that suggest her interest in the Beast of the North has less to do with genuine attraction and more to do with positioning herself as the power behind his throne." Thane's expression grew grave. "Be careful, child. There are forces at work here that go far beyond a simple mating alliance." Before Kira could ask what he meant, the laundry room door burst open with enough force to rattle the hinges. Seraphina herself stood in the doorway, her golden hair perfectly arranged and her blue dress immaculate despite the early hour. But it was her eyes that made Kira's blood run cold. Gone was the practised seductiveness she had displayed in the great hall. In its place was something sharp and calculating and utterly ruthless. "Elder Thane," Seraphina said, her voice honey-sweet but with an undertone that raised the hair on Kira's arms. "How lovely to find you here, and with our little cursed servant, no less." Thane immediately stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between Seraphina and Kira. "Seraphina, congratulations on your betrothal." "Oh, it's not official yet," Seraphina replied, with a smile that was all teeth. "But it will be. The beast has agreed to consider my proposal, and I am very persuasive when I set my mind to something." Her gaze shifted to Kira, and the false sweetness in her expression sharpened into something that looked like pure malice. "Though I must admit I'm curious about something." Seraphina took a step into the room, and Kira caught the scent of roses, and something underneath that smelled like decay. "Last night at the feast, I noticed our honoured guest paying rather close attention to the help. Tell me, little servant, did you do something to catch the beast's eye?" The question was casual, almost conversational, but Kira could hear the threat beneath the words. This was not idle curiosity. This was a predator identifying a potential rival and preparing to eliminate the competition. "I don't know what you mean," Kira said quietly, her instincts screaming at her to flee. "Don't you?" Seraphina's smile widened. "How interesting, because from where I was sitting, it looked almost as if he recognized you, as if there was some connection between you." Thane's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward the pendant he had hidden back in his robes, ready to intervene if necessary. But before he could act, before anyone could speak, the scent of winter storms filled the laundry room like a physical presence. Fenrir appeared in the doorway behind Seraphina, his massive frame filling the space and his storm-grey eyes taking in the scene with predatory assessment. His gaze lingered on Kira for just a moment too long before shifting to Seraphina with an expression that gave nothing away. "Seraphina," he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of absolute command. "You're needed in the Great Hall. There are details of the alliance to discuss." "Of course, my lord." Seraphina's predatory smile transformed back into practiced seduction so quickly that Kira might have imagined the earlier malice. "I was just having a friendly conversation with the help." But as she passed Kira on her way to the door, she leaned close enough to whisper words that only enhanced wolf hearing could catch. "Stay away from what belongs to me, little servant, or you'll discover just how cursed you really are." Then she was gone, gliding from the room with fluid grace while Fenrir watched her departure with an unreadable expression. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle lapping of wash-water against the sides of the basin. Then Fenrir's attention shifted to Thane, and Kira saw something pass between the two men that she could not interpret. "Elder," Fenrir said quietly. "A word." Thane inclined his head respectfully. "Of course, my lord." They left together, their quiet voices fading down the corridor, and Kira was alone once again, with her shattered hopes and the echo of Seraphina's threat ringing in her ears. But as she returned to her washing, her fingers encountered something unexpected in the soapy water. The pendant, somehow transferred to her during Thane's hasty concealment, lay warm against her palm like a living thing. And for the first time since learning about the proposed alliance, Kira felt something other than despair stirring in her chest. Her wolf, so long suppressed and silent, was finally beginning to wake up. The pendant burned against Kira's chest, where she had hidden it beneath her worn dress, its ancient silver growing warm with each passing hour. By midday, the heat had become almost unbearable, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, as if the artifact had somehow synchronized itself with her very life force. She was in the stables, mucking out stalls and trying to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of physical labour, when the first surge hit her like lightning. Power, raw and ancient and utterly foreign, flooding through her veins like molten gold. The pitchfork in her hands snapped cleanly in half, the wooden handle splintering as her grip tightened involuntarily. Around her, the horses whinnied nervously, sensing the supernatural energy crackling through the air. Kira dropped the broken pieces and stumbled backward, pressing one hand to her chest where the pendant lay hidden. The silver was so hot now that it nearly burned through the thin fabric of her dress, and she could swear she felt something moving beneath her skin, trying to claw its way to the surface. "Not now," she whispered desperately, as if she could somehow negotiate with the power that was tearing through her like a wildfire. "Please, not now." But whatever force had been sleeping in her blood for the past 5 years was done with patience. The suppression spell that had held it in check was crumbling, worn thin by proximity to her mate and shattered completely by contact with her ancestral pendant. Another surge, stronger this time, and the metal buckles on the nearest horse's bridle simply exploded. The animal reared in terror, its hooves striking sparks from the stone floor as it fought against its restraints. "Easy!" Kira gasped, stumbling toward the panicked horse with her hands outstretched. "Easy! It's all right!" The moment her fingers touched the animal's neck, the change was immediate. The horse went perfectly still, its wild eyes focusing on her with something that looked almost like recognition. And in that instant, Kira understood with crystal clarity what was happening. Her wolf was waking up. The royal bloodline that had been hidden for so long was finally asserting itself, and with it came power that she had no idea how to control. She backed away from the horse, her breath coming in short gasps as she fought to contain the energy coursing through her system. But it was like trying to hold back an ocean with her bare hands. The power wanted out, wanted to declare itself to the world in ways that would leave no doubt about what she truly was. The stable door crashed open and Kira spun around to find Damien standing in the entrance with several other pack members behind him. Their expressions shifted from casual curiosity to shock as they took in the scene, the broken bridle, the unnaturally calm horse, and Kira herself radiating an aura of barely contained power. "What the hell is going on here?" Damien demanded, but there was something in his voice that had never been there before. Uncertainty. As if for the first time in years he was not entirely sure of his position in the pack hierarchy. "Nothing," Kira managed, backing toward the far wall of the stable. "Just an accident with the bridle. I'll clean it up." But even as she spoke, another wave of power rolled through her, and this time she could not contain it. The metal water troughs along the wall began to vibrate, their surfaces rippling as if struck by earthquake tremors. The very air around her seemed to shimmer with golden light. Damien's eyes widened in alarm. "You're doing that? How are you—" He stopped mid-sentence, his nostrils flaring as he caught something that made his face go pale. "Your scent. It's changing." Kira could smell it too, now that he had mentioned it. The neutral, almost absent fragrance she had carried her entire life was being replaced by something rich and complex. Cedar and moonlight, winter frost and wild flowers. The scent of ancient bloodlines and royal power. "That's impossible," one of the other pack members whispered. "She's wolfless, cursed." But the evidence was mounting around them like a supernatural storm. The pendant beneath Kira's dress was glowing now, its light visible even through the fabric. Her eyes, normally plain brown, had begun to flicker with flecks of silver that caught the afternoon sun like chips of starlight. "Stay back," Kira warned, though she was not sure if she was trying to protect them or protect herself from what she might do if they came closer. "Something's wrong. Something's happening to me." Damien took a step forward instead of back, and she saw calculation in his expression. "If you really are carrying royal blood, do you know what that means? What you could be worth?" The mercenary gleam in his eyes sent ice through her veins. Of course. Even if they accepted that she was more than she appeared, their first thought would be how to profit from it, how to use her for their own advancement. "I'm not worth anything," she said desperately, trying to cling to the identity that had defined her for so long. "I'm just Kira, just the cursed servant girl." But another power surge chose that moment to tear through her, and this time It brought her wolf surging toward the surface with desperate hunger. For just an instant, she felt herself begin to shift, felt her bones starting to lengthen and her face pushing forward into a muzzle. The sensation was agony and ecstasy combined, every nerve in her body catching fire as her suppressed nature finally fought for freedom. But before the shift could complete itself, before she could discover what her true form looked like, iron control slammed down like a cage. Fenrir was there. She had not heard him enter, had not sensed his approach, but suddenly he was standing between her and Damien, with his massive frame radiating menace. The other pack members immediately dropped their gazes and backed toward the stable entrance, their survival instincts overriding their curiosity. "Leave!" Fenrir commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha king. "All of you, now!" They fled without question, Damien shooting one last calculating look at Kira before disappearing through the stable doors. When they were alone, Fenrir turned to face her, and she saw something in his storm-grey eyes that made her breath catch. Not surprise, not confusion, recognition. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long what?" But even as Kira asked the question, she knew what he meant. "How long has the suppression spell been failing?" She could not lie to him, not when he was looking at her with those knowing eyes. "Since you arrived. It started the moment I saw you." Fenrir nodded, as if that confirmed something he had already suspected. "The mate bond is accelerating the breakdown. Your wolf recognizes mine and is fighting to reach me." "I don't understand any of this," Kira whispered, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could somehow hold the power inside through physical force. "I've never felt anything like this before." "Because it was never allowed to surface before." Fenrir moved closer, and she could feel the pull between them intensifying as the distance decreased. Royal bloodlines carry more than just political significance. They carry power, ancient magic that has been passed down through generations of rulers. "But I'm not a ruler. I'm nobody." "Are you?" His gaze dropped to her chest, where the pendant's glow was still visible through her dress. "What are you wearing?" Kira's hand moved instinctively to cover the hidden artifact. "Nothing. Just show me." The command was soft but absolute, and Kira found herself reaching beneath her neckline to draw out the pendant. The moment it cleared the fabric, the entire stable was flooded with silver light, and she heard Fenrir draw in a sharp breath. "The moonstone of Astra," he said, his voice filled with something that sounded almost like reverence. "I thought it was lost when Princess Lyanna disappeared." "You know what it is?" "Every wolf of royal blood knows that pendant. It has been worn by the queens of the Northern Crown for 3 centuries, and it only responds to the true bloodline." Fenrir's eyes met hers, and she saw acknowledgement there that he could no longer deny. "You are exactly what Thane claimed you are." The admission should have filled her with triumph, with vindication after years of being dismissed as worthless. Instead, it only deepened her fear. "What does that mean?" she asked. "What happens now?" Fenrir was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable as he studied her face. "Now, everything becomes infinitely more complicated." Before she could ask what he meant, the pendant pulsed with another surge of power, and this time it brought something with it that made them both freeze in shock. A connection, sudden and overwhelming, flooding through the mate bond that had been building between them for days. For just an instant, Kira could feel everything Fenrir was feeling. The desire he had been fighting, the duty that warred with his heart, the bone-deep loneliness that he carried like an old wound, and beneath it all, a terror that matched her own, because he knew, just as she was beginning to understand, that this changed everything between them. "We can't," he said quietly, but his words lacked conviction. "Can't what?" "Be what we are to each other. The mate bond might be real, but I have responsibilities, territories depending on my strength, enemies watching for any sign of weakness." His voice grew harsh with self-recrimination. "I cannot afford to choose my heart over my duty." "Then don't." The words surprised Kira as much as they seemed to surprise him. Choose duty, marry Seraphina, form your alliance. And what about you? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them wanted to face. I'll survive, Kira said finally. I always have. But even as she spoke the words, another pulse from the pendant sent power surging through her system, and she knew that survival was no longer the simple matter it had once been. Her wolf was awake now, fully conscious and absolutely furious at the thought of being separated from its mate. And royal wolves, she was beginning to understand, did not simply endure rejection. They fought back. The stable doors exploded inward, splintering off their hinges as if struck by a battering ram. But it was not a weapon that had destroyed them. It was Seraphina, and she was no longer bothering to hide the predator beneath her beautiful facade. "Well," she said, her voice like poisoned honey as she took in the scene before her, "isn't this interesting?" Seraphina's entrance shattered the fragile intimacy of the moment like glass against stone. She stood in the ruined doorway, with her golden hair catching the afternoon light, and her blue eyes blazing with a fury so intense it made the air shimmer with heat. But it was not human fury, not entirely. Power radiated from her in waves that made Kira's newly awakened senses recoil in instinctive revulsion. This was not the clean, ancient magic of royal bloodlines. This was something darker, something that tasted of shadows and decay and old bargains made in desperate moments. "How touching," Seraphina purred, her gaze moving between Fenrir and Kira with predatory assessment. The beast and his little pet sharing secrets in the stables like common lovers. Fenrir moved immediately, placing himself between the two women with the fluid grace of a natural killer. "Seraphina, you're interrupting a private conversation." "Am I?" Her smile was all teeth and malice. "How rude of me, though I must say I'm fascinated by what I'm sensing here." Her nostrils flared delicately, and Kira saw recognition flicker across her perfect features. That scent, so rich, so complex, almost like... She paused, her eyes widening with theatrical surprise. "Royalty." The word hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Kira felt Fenrir's tension ratchet higher, his muscles coiling as if preparing for battle. "Don't be ridiculous," he said, but there was something in his voice that contradicted the dismissal. "She's a servant." "Is she?" Seraphina took a step closer, and Kira caught the scent that had disturbed her before. Roses and rot, beauty concealing corruption. "Because what I'm smelling suggests something far more interesting than a servant girl." Another step, and now Kira could see the unnatural shine in Seraphina's eyes, a gleam that spoke of power that was not entirely her own. "Stay back," Kira warned, though her voice shook with the effort of containing the energy still surging through her system. Seraphina laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. "Oh, little servant, you have no idea what you're dealing with, do you? Did you really think hiding behind a suppression spell would keep your secrets safe forever?" The casual mention of the spell sent ice through Kira's veins. "How do you know about that?" "I know many things," Seraphina replied, her smile growing wider and more predatory. "For instance, I know that royal bloodlines carry certain vulnerabilities, especially when they're first awakening to their power." She raised one perfectly manicured hand, and Kira felt something slam into her chest like a physical blow. Not pain exactly, but a wrongness that made her wolf snarl in fury and her newly awakened magic recoil in horror. "Dark magic!" Fenrir growled, his own power flaring to life in response to the threat. "You're using dark magic." "Such an ugly term," Seraphina said with mock sadness. "I prefer to think of it as enhanced natural abilities. After all, not all of us can rely on pure bloodline power to achieve our goals." Another pulse of that wrongness, stronger this time, and Kira doubled over as her wolf began thrashing wildly against the supernatural attack. The pendant at her chest blazed with silver light, trying to shield her from whatever Seraphina was doing, but the dark power was like acid against her newly awakened senses. "Stop," Fenrir commanded, and there was something in his voice that Kira had never heard before, not just authority, but genuine fear. "You have no idea what you're risking." "Don't I?" Seraphina's attention shifted to him, and for the first time since entering the stable, her mask of perfect control showed cracks. "Do you really think I would allow some pretender to steal what belongs to me? I have worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let a worthless servant girl ruin my plans." "She's not," Fenrir began, but Seraphina cut him off with a gesture that sent dark power crackling through the air. "She's not what? Not worthless? Not a servant?" Seraphina's laugh was poison sweet. "Or were you about to say she's not a threat to me, because we both know that would be a lie?" The admission hung between them like a confession, and Kira saw something flicker across Fenrir's scarred features. Guilt, perhaps, or recognition of a truth he had been trying to deny. "The mate bond," Seraphina continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than her earlier shouts. "I can smell it on both of you, that pathetic golden thread that lesser wolves mistake for destiny." She took another step closer, and this time the dark power she wielded felt like claws raking across Kira's soul. "But bonds can be broken," Seraphina said with casual cruelty, "especially when one of the bonded pair is too weak to maintain their end of the connection." The next attack was not subtle. Dark magic slammed into Kira like a tidal wave, targeting the very core of her newly awakened power with surgical precision. She felt her wolf cry out in agony as something essential was torn away, felt the golden thread connecting her to Fenrir stretch thin under the assault. But instead of breaking under the pressure, instead of collapsing as Seraphina clearly expected, something else happened entirely. Kira's royal blood rose to meet the attack. The moonstone of Astra erupted with light that turned the stable into a miniature sun, and the power that had been building in Kira's chest finally found its outlet. Not wild and uncontrolled as it had been moments before, but focused and furious and absolutely lethal. The dark magic shattered against her defences like waves against a cliff, and Seraphina stumbled backward with genuine shock written across her perfect features. "Impossible," she breathed. "You're too weak, too broken." "No," Kira said quietly, and for the first time in her life, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone born to rule. "I'm exactly what I was always meant to be." Her wolf surged forward, no longer suppressed or hidden, and Kira felt herself begin to shift for the first time in her life. But this was not the painful, uncontrolled transformation she had experienced earlier. This was power claiming its rightful place, royal bloodline asserting its dominance over everything that had tried to diminish it. Silver light poured from her skin as bones lengthened and reformed, as her spine stretched and her face pushed forward into an elegant muzzle. Her wolf was magnificent, she realized with a shock of pure joy. Massive and silver white like moonlight on snow, with eyes that blazed like stars and a presence that made the very air sing with power. When the transformation was complete, she stood before Seraphina as what she truly was, not a servant, not a victim, but a queen. Fenrir's reaction was immediate and devastating. His own wolf rose to the surface in response to hers, the massive black beast that had terrorized armies across the continent. But instead of dominance, instead of the territorial aggression she might have expected, his wolf did something that made Seraphina gasp in horror. It submitted. The beast of the north, the alpha king who had never bowed to anyone, lowered his great head and exposed his throat to Kira's silver wolf. Recognition, acknowledgement, and something deeper than either flooded through the mate bond as his beast finally accepted what his human mind had been fighting. She was not just his equal, she was his superior. "No!" Seraphina shrieked, her composure finally cracking completely. "This is not possible. You cannot be—" But her protest was cut off as Kira's wolf turned those star-bright eyes on her with the focused attention of a predator selecting prey. Royal power, 3 centuries of accumulated magic, and the fury of a wolf too long denied its true nature, combined into something that made Seraphina's dark magic look like a candle flame beside a bonfire. When Kira spoke, her voice carried the harmonic undertones of her wolf's growl, and every word resonated with absolute authority. "You will cease your attacks on my mate," she commanded, and the power behind the words made the stable walls tremble. "You will leave this territory, and you will never threaten what belongs to me again." Seraphina tried to rally, tried to summon more of her stolen power, but it was like trying to fight an avalanche with a handful of snow. The royal bloodline that had been hidden for so long was fully awake now, and it would not be denied. "This isn't over," Seraphina snarled, backing toward the ruined doorway with fear finally showing in her eyes. "You may have power, but you don't have the knowledge to use it properly, and there are others who will not simply bow to your bloodline like your pathetic beast." She fled then, her exit far less graceful than her entrance, leaving behind only the lingering scent of roses and corruption. In the sudden silence that followed, Kira shifted back to human form with fluid ease that spoke of her wolf's contentment. The silver light faded from her skin, but the power remained, humming through her veins like a song she had been waiting her whole life to hear. Fenrir shifted as well, returning to his human shape, but remaining on one knee before her, with his head bowed in a display of submission that would have shocked anyone who witnessed it. "My queen," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. Not just acknowledgement, not just political recognition, love, pure and devastating and absolutely certain. "Fenrir," she whispered, reaching out to touch his bowed head with trembling fingers. "Stand up." He rose slowly, his storm-grey eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her soul sing. "I fought it," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I tried to deny what we are to each other because I thought duty mattered more than destiny. And now I understand that you are both." He reached out to cup her face in his scarred hands, his touch infinitely gentle, despite the strength she knew he possessed. "My duty and my destiny, my queen and my mate." The golden thread between them pulsed with warmth and joy and the bone-deep certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. But even as Kira lost herself in the storm of his eyes, even as she finally allowed herself to believe in the impossible thing that was happening between them, she could not forget Seraphina's parting threat. This was not over. If anything, it was just beginning. But as Fenrir lowered his head to claim her lips in a kiss that tasted like winter storms and destiny fulfilled, Kira found she was no longer afraid of what might come. She was a queen now, in truth as well as blood, and queens did not cower in the face of threats, they conquered them. The sacred grove had always been Kira's refuge, the one place in Crescent Moon territory where she could escape the cruelties and whispers that followed her everywhere else. Ancient oaks stretched their gnarled branches overhead, their leaves filtering the afternoon sunlight into shifting patterns of gold and green that danced across the forest floor. She had come here to think, to process the earth-shattering revelations of the past few days. The awakening of her wolf, the mate bond with Fenrir, the confirmation of her royal bloodline. Everything she had believed about herself had been stripped away and rebuilt in the span of hours, leaving her feeling raw and uncertain despite the power now humming through her veins. The moonstone of Astra lay warm against her chest, its silver light subdued but present, a constant reminder of the destiny she had never asked for but could no longer deny. Her wolf paced restlessly beneath her skin, still intoxicated by its first taste of freedom after years of suppression. She was so lost in her own thoughts that she almost missed the sound of footsteps approaching through the undergrowth. almost. Her newly awakened senses caught the scent first, roses and corruption, beauty masking decay. Seraphina had found her. Kira turned slowly, her hand moving instinctively to the pendant beneath her dress. The other woman emerged from the shadows between the trees with predatory grace, but there was something different about her now, something that made Kira's wolf snarl in warning. The perfect facade was gone. Seraphina's golden hair hung loose and wild around her shoulders, and her blue eyes blazed with an unnatural light that spoke of power drawn from dark sources. More disturbing still was the weapon in her hand, a blade that seemed to drink in the forest's light, its metal so black it appeared to be carved from shadow itself. "Hello, little pretender," Seraphina purred, her voice carrying harmonics that made Kira's skin crawl. "Did you really think you could steal what belongs to me and simply walk away?" "I stole nothing," Kira replied, though she kept her voice calm despite the fear beginning to bloom in her chest. The mate bond chose wrong." Seraphina's interruption was sharp as breaking glass. "Fenrir belongs to me, has always belonged to me since the moment I decided I wanted him, and I do not share." She began circling Kira with the fluid movements of a hunter stalking prey, the shadow blade weaving hypnotic patterns in the air. "Do you know what this is, little servant? This beautiful blade that will end your pathetic existence?" Kira's wolf pressed closer to the surface, recognizing danger in a way her human mind was still struggling to process. "I don't care what it is. You should." Seraphina's smile was all teeth and malice. "It's called Soul Rend, forged in the dark places beyond the northern mountains, blessed by powers that predate your precious royal bloodline by millennia. One cut, and it doesn't just kill the body. It devours the soul, ensuring that not even death can reunite you with your beloved beast." The words hit Kira like physical blows, each one designed to terrorize and weaken. But instead of cowering, instead of begging for mercy as Seraphina clearly expected, Kira felt something else rising within her. Fury, pure and righteous and absolutely lethal. "You made a mistake coming here alone," Kira said quietly, her voice carrying new undertones that spoke of awakened power. "Did you really think I would be as helpless as I was in the stable?" Seraphina's circling faltered for just a moment. "You may have royal blood, but you're untrained, unschooled in the use of real power. What can you possibly do against centuries of accumulated dark magic?" "Let's find out." The words had barely left Kira's lips when Seraphina struck, moving with inhuman speed as she brought Solren slashing toward Kira's throat. But the blade met not vulnerable flesh, but a barrier of silver light that erupted from the moonstone of Astra like a shield made of starfire. The impact sent shockwaves through the sacred grove, ancient trees groaning under the force of power meeting power. Seraphina snarled in frustration as her killing blow was turned aside, but she was far from finished. Dark magic poured from her in waves, turning the afternoon shadows into grasping tendrils that reached for Kira with hungry intent. The very air grew thick and poisonous, corruption spreading like infection through the sacred space. But royal blood had been defending against such attacks for 3 centuries, and the magic that flowed through Kira's veins carried the accumulated wisdom of generations of warrior queens. The silver light of her power pushed back against the darkness, cleansing and purifying until the grove began to shine like dawn breaking over a mountain peak. "Impossible!" Seraphina gasped, her perfect features twisting with rage and disbelief. "You've been awake for less than a day. You cannot possibly—" Her words were cut off as Kira's power slammed into her like a battering ram, sending her stumbling backward against the trunk of an ancient oak. The shadow blade fell from nerveless fingers, its dark metal hissing and smoking where it touched the grove's now purified earth. "I am the heir to Queen Astra," Kira said, her voice ringing with authority that made the very trees seem to bend in acknowledgement. I carry the blood of rulers who united the northern clans and held back the darkness for 300 years. Did you really think your stolen magic could stand against that legacy?" Seraphina struggled to her feet, her composure finally cracking completely as she faced the reality of her failure. "This isn't over. Even if you kill me here, there are others, forces that will not rest until—" "Until what?" Kira stepped closer, silver light pulsing around her like captured moonbeams. "Until they eliminate the rightful queen of the Northern Crown? Until they can install their own puppet on the throne?" The admission in Seraphina's eyes was all the confirmation Kira needed. This had never been about stealing Fenrir's affections. This was about power on a scale she was only beginning to understand. "Who sent you?" Kira demanded, her royal authority compelling truth. "Who gave you that blade and taught you to use dark magic?" Seraphina's lips twisted in a snarl of defiance, but the compulsion was too strong to resist. "The Eastern Lords, they've been planning this for years, ever since rumours began circulating about a lost northern princess hidden in the southern territories. And Fenrir, was he supposed to be part of their plan?" "He was supposed to be weakened by binding himself to me," Seraphina spat, her hatred finally showing without disguise. A political marriage that would have given the Eastern Lords influence over the Northern Crown. But then you appeared, and everything started falling apart. The confession hung in the air like poison, and Kira felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Her parents' deaths, the suppression spell, even the cruel treatment she had endured from the pack. It had all been orchestrated to keep her weak, hidden unaware of her true nature until it was too late to matter. But they had miscalculated. The mate bond with Fenrir had accelerated her awakening, and now she stood before her would-be assassin as everything they had tried to prevent her from becoming. "You failed," Kira said simply, "and now you will answer for that failure." She reached out with her power, silver light wrapping around Seraphina like chains forged from starfire. The other woman struggled against the bonds, dark magic flaring desperately as she tried to break free, but royal authority was absolute when properly applied. "I could kill you," Kira continued, her voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. "Your crimes against the crown certainly warrant death." Terror flickered across Seraphina's perfect features. "Please." "But I won't." The words seemed to surprise them both. "Because you're going to carry a message back to your Eastern Lords. Tell them that the lost princess of the Northern Crown has awakened. Tell them that she stands beside the beast of the North as his queen and equal. And tell them that if they move against either of us again, they will face the full wrath of united bloodlines." With a gesture, Kira released the bonds of light, and Seraphina collapsed to her knees on the forest floor. The shadow blade had turned to ash where it lay, destroyed by contact with purified earth. "Go," Kira commanded, "before I change my mind about mercy." Seraphina scrambled to her feet, her composure shattered and her power spent. But as she turned to flee, she cast one last venomous look over her shoulder. "This isn't over, Pretender. The Eastern Lords have resources you cannot imagine. Allies who make my power look like a child's toy. They will come for you, and when they do, they will face a queen who is no longer hiding." Kira's voice carried across the grove like a promise and a threat combined. "Run, little conspirator, and pray that I remain as merciful when next we meet." Seraphina fled then, crashing through the undergrowth with none of her earlier grace, leaving behind only the lingering scent of roses and fear. Kira remained in the grove as silence returned, her power slowly settling back to its usual quiet hum beneath her skin. The moonstone of Astra had returned to its subtle glow, but she could feel the change in herself. The awakening was complete now, her royal nature fully integrated with her human consciousness and her wolf's fierce protectiveness. She was no longer the broken servant girl who had scrubbed floors and absorbed cruelties. She was no longer even the confused young woman who had discovered her bloodline and struggled to accept her destiny. She was a queen, and queens protected what belonged to them. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn, but this time she felt no fear. She recognized the scent, the presence, the way her wolf rose to meet its mate with joy instead of aggression. Fenrir emerged from the trees at a run, his face a mask of concern and barely contained fury. "I felt it through the bond," he said without preamble. "The danger, the power you unleashed. Are you hurt?" "No." Kira moved into his arms as naturally as breathing, letting his warmth and strength anchor her after the confrontation. "But we have a problem." "Seraphina?" "The Eastern Lords. She was their agent, sent to weaken you through a political marriage, while I remained hidden and powerless." Kira pulled back to meet his storm-grey eyes. "They've been planning this for years, Fenrir. My parents' deaths, the suppression spell, everything that happened to keep me from claiming my birthright." She saw understanding dawn in his expression, followed immediately by the cold fury of an alpha whose mate had been threatened. They made a grave error in judgment. "Yes," Kira agreed, her own voice carrying echoes of royal wrath. "They did." As they stood together in the sacred grove, silver light and winter storms perfectly balanced, Kira felt the future shifting around them like the turn of seasons. War was coming. She could sense it in the very air. But she was no longer afraid. The beast of the north had found his queen, and together they were unstoppable. The transformation in how the pack treated her was as swift as it was absolute. Kira walked through the main courtyard the morning after her confrontation with Seraphina, and for the first time in 5 years, conversations did not die when she approached. Instead, pack members stepped aside with respectful bows, their eyes downcast in the proper deference due to royalty. The servants who had once delighted in giving her the most demeaning tasks now waited for her commands with barely concealed terror. The change should have been satisfying. After years of cruelty and dismissal, vindication should have tasted sweet. Instead, Kira found herself struggling with the hollow victory of respect born from fear rather than genuine regard. "My lady," stammered Marcus, the pack's head groundskeeper, who had made her life miserable with impossible demands and vicious criticism. "Is there anything you require? Any service I can provide?" The same man who had once made her scrub the same patch of stone 5 times because he claimed she had missed a spot now trembled before her like a leaf in a storm. Kira studied his frightened face and felt no satisfaction, only a weary kind of sadness. "No, Marcus," she said quietly, "continue with your duties." He scurried away with obvious relief, and Kira continued her path toward the pack house. Similar scenes played out with every step, former tormentors now desperate to curry favour, servants who had ignored her existence now eager to prove their loyalty. It was Alpha Marcus himself who provided the most dramatic example of the pack's collective about-face. She found him waiting in the great hall, pacing with nervous energy that spoke of a sleepless night. The moment he saw her enter, he dropped to one knee with his head bowed in submission, so complete it bordered on theatrical. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice thick with desperate reverence. "Princess Kira of the Northern Crown, the entire pack wishes to formally apologize for our treatment of you. We were blind, ignorant of your true nature, and we beg your forgiveness for our transgressions." Kira stared down at the man who had allowed her to be used as the pack's scapegoat, who had turned a blind eye to years of systematic cruelty. His submission was perfect in its technique, but she could smell the fear sweat on him, could hear the rapid beating of his heart. He was not sorry for what he had done to her. He was terrified of what she might do to him. "Rise, Alpha Marcus," she said finally, her voice carrying the natural authority of her bloodline. "Your apology is noted." He scrambled to his feet, hope and terror warring in his expression. "We stand ready to serve you in all things, Your Majesty, whatever you require, whatever you command." "What I require is the truth," Kira replied, moving to stand before the great hearth where a fire crackled merrily in the morning light. How long have you known what I was?" The question hit him like a physical blow. She watched colour drain from his face as he realised she was not going to simply accept his submission and move on. We suspected nothing, Your Majesty. The suppression spell hid my scent and power," Kira interrupted, turning to face him with eyes that blazed with silver light. "It did not erase the records of my birth. It did not change the fact that Princess Lyanna died defending this territory alongside her mate. So I ask again, how long have you known?" Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around the great hall, other pack members had begun gathering, drawn by the scent of confrontation and the unmistakable aura of royal authority that now surrounded their former scapegoat. "Elder Thane knew," Marcus finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "He came to me when you were 15, told me about your bloodline, begged me to treat you with the respect due to your station." The admission sent murmurs through the assembled crowd, but Kira's attention remained fixed on the cowering Alpha. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him." Marcus swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "I told him that hidden royalty was no royalty at all, that if you could not claim or defend your birthright, then it was meaningless." "I see." Kira's voice remained perfectly calm, but power radiated from her in waves that made every wolf in the hall drop their gazes in instinctive submission. "So you chose to treat a princess of the Northern Crown as a servant. You allowed your pack members to use her as a target for their cruelties and frustrations. You turned a blind eye while she was blamed for every misfortune that befell this territory. Your Majesty." "Please." "Did you know about the Eastern Lord's conspiracy?" The question cut through his attempted plea like a blade through silk. "Did you know that my parents' deaths were orchestrated, that the suppression spell was meant to keep me weak and hidden until I could be eliminated?" Marcus's face went from pale to grey. "No, Your Majesty, I swear on my pack bonds, I knew nothing of any conspiracy. I believed your parents died in a simple border skirmish." Kira studied his face with the enhanced senses of her awakened bloodline, testing his words for deception. What she found was not malice or treason, but something perhaps worse, willful ignorance combined with cowardice. "You chose to believe the comfortable lie," she said finally, "because the truth would have required you to act with honour instead of convenience." The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Marcus flinched as if she had struck him, and several pack members shifted uncomfortably as they recognised their own failures reflected in her judgment. "Tell me," Kira continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the great hall, "what should be the fate of an Alpha who fails to protect a royal heir placed in his care? What punishment fits such a betrayal of duty?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus remained frozen, waiting for a sentence that could range from exile to death depending on her whim. Instead, Kira surprised them all. "Nothing," she said quietly. "Your punishment is to live with the knowledge of what you are, to spend every remaining day of your life knowing that you failed in the most fundamental duty of leadership, protecting the innocent." She turned away from him, addressing the assembled pack with the natural command presence of someone born to rule. "I am not your Alpha. I never was, and I never will be. My destiny lies with the Northern Crown and the mate the universe chose for me. But I am still the daughter of wolves who died defending this territory, and their sacrifice means that your welfare is not beneath my notice." The power in her voice made every wolf in the hall straighten with unconscious respect. This was not the broken servant girl they had tormented for years. This was a queen addressing her subjects. "Changes will be made," Kira continued. "The Pax Omega members will be treated with dignity, not used as targets for others' frustrations. Punishment will be proportionate to crimes, not arbitrarily cruel. And any wolf who thinks to use weakness as an excuse for cruelty will answer to me personally." She paused, her silver-bright gaze sweeping across faces that now showed genuine respect alongside their fear. "I forgive your past treatment of me," she said finally, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because carrying hatred would diminish what I have become. But understand this, forgiveness is not forgetfulness. I will remember every cruelty, every dismissal, every moment when you chose convenience over compassion, and I will ensure that no one else suffers as I suffered under your neglect." The promise hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Then Kira turned and walked from the great hall, leaving behind a pack that finally understood exactly what they had lost through their cruelty and what they had gained through her mercy. Outside the pack house, she found Fenrir waiting for her with an expression of quiet pride on his scarred features. "You handled that well," he said as she approached. "Firmly but justly. Your mother would have been proud." "You heard?" She should not have been surprised. The mate bond had been growing stronger each day, allowing them to sense each other's emotions and sometimes even thoughts across distances. "I felt your anger through our connection," he admitted, "and your restraint. It would have been within your rights to demand blood payment for the way they treated you." "Blood payment would not have changed anything," Kira replied, moving into his arms as naturally as breathing. "They fear me now because they understand my power. But fear is not the foundation for the kind of leadership I want to build." Fenrir's expression grew thoughtful as he considered her words. "You're not like other royalty I've known. Most would have demanded immediate restitution, used their power to extract vengeance for past wrongs. Maybe that's because most royalty never had to learn what it feels like to be powerless." Kira looked back at the pack house where she could still feel the emotional turmoil of wolves grappling with their changed reality. "I know what it's like to be dismissed, ignored, treated as less than nothing. I won't become the kind of ruler who forgets that lesson." "And that," Fenrir said quietly, "is exactly why you'll be a great queen." The words sent warmth flooding through the mate bond, and Kira felt something settle into place deep in her chest. The pack's recognition, the confirmation of her bloodline, even the defeat of Seraphina's assassination attempt, none of it had felt as real as this moment of quiet understanding with the wolf who would stand beside her throne. "The Eastern Lords will come," she said, voicing the concern that had been weighing on her mind since Seraphina's revelations. "Let them come," Fenrir replied, his voice carrying the cold promise of winter storms. "They made their first mistake when they moved against you in the shadows. When they face us together in the open, they'll discover just how costly that error was." Kira nodded, her own power rising in response to his, silver light and darkness intertwining like lovers' hands. The pack behind them had finally learned to show proper respect. The conspiracy against her had been revealed. Now it was time to claim her crown and face whatever enemies remained standing against them. Together, they were ready for war. The arena had been transformed into something magnificent and terrible. Ancient banners bearing the symbols of both the Northern Crown and Fenrir's war pack hung from the stone walls, their rich fabrics catching the torchlight and casting dancing shadows across the blood-stained floor that Kira had once scrubbed on her hands and knees. Every seat was filled with witnesses, pack members, visiting dignitaries, and warriors who had travelled from distant territories to witness what promised to be a battle for the ages. At the centre of it all stood Seraphina, no longer bothering with the facade of golden perfection. Her hair hung wild and loose, her eyes blazed with unnatural light, and dark power radiated from her like heat from a forge. She wore armour that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and in her hands she carried weapons that had been forged in places where mercy was forgotten and honour was currency for the weak. "Are you ready to die, pretender?" she called out, her voice carrying across the arena with supernatural resonance. "Ready to discover what happens when stolen crowns meet real power?" Kira stepped into the arena wearing simple leather fighting gear, the moonstone of Astra glowing softly against her chest. She carried no weapons beyond the ones she had been born with: royal blood, awakened power, and the fury of a wolf who had been denied her true nature for far too long. "I am ready to end this," she replied, her voice carrying the natural authority that made even the distant spectators lean forward to catch every word. "Are you prepared to face the consequences of your treason?" The formal challenge had been issued at dawn, witnessed by both packs and sealed with blood according to the ancient laws. Single combat to determine the rightful mate of the beast of the north, with no interference permitted from any outside source. Fenrir stood in the place of honour, reserved for the prize being fought over, but his storm-grey eyes held none of the detachment such a position should require. The mate bond thrummed between them like a living thing, carrying his confidence in her abilities, along with his barely leashed desire to intervene if things went wrong. "You cannot win," Seraphina continued, beginning to circle the arena's perimeter like a predator stalking prey. "I have trained with masters of dark magic since childhood. I have studied every weakness of royal bloodlines, learned every technique for breaking the proud and bringing them to their knees." "Have you?" Kira remained perfectly still in the arena's centre, tracking Seraphina's movement with the enhanced senses of her awakened wolf. "Then you should know that northern royal blood carries more than just political authority." Power began to rise around her like silver mist, and the ancient stones of the arena seemed to respond with recognition. This was sacred ground, a place where challenges had been fought and destinies decided for centuries. The stones themselves remembered the touch of royal magic. "Party tricks and bloodline theatre," Seraphina sneered, but there was something in her voice that suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as her audience. "Let me show you what real power looks like." Dark magic erupted from her in a wave that turned the arena's torchlight to sickly green and made the air itself seem to thicken with malevolence. Spectators gasped and recoiled as the corruption washed over them, but the wave broke like water against stone when it met the barrier of silver light surrounding Kira. "Impossible," Seraphina breathed, her confidence cracking for the first time since entering the arena. "Ah, is it?" Kira stepped forward, and each footfall seemed to ring against the stones like a bell tolling destiny. "Did your masters of dark magic forget to mention that this arena has been consecrated by 3 centuries of royal blood? That every stone has been touched by the power you're trying to corrupt?" The truth of her words became evident as silver light began emanating from the arena walls themselves, ancient magic responding to the presence of its rightful heir. The sick green glow of Seraphina's power was pushed back step by step, leaving her standing in an ever-shrinking circle of darkness. "Then I'll simply have to kill you quickly," Seraphina snarled, abandoning subtlety for direct assault. She moved with inhuman speed, her shadow-forged weapons cutting through the air in patterns designed to kill rather than merely defeat. But Kira was no longer the untrained servant who had cowered in stables and scrubbed floors in silence. Royal blood carried more than power. It carried the accumulated combat knowledge of generations of warrior queens, muscle memory encoded in her very DNA and awakened by the crisis of battle. Kira flowed aside from the killing strike like water around stone, her own movements carrying the lethal grace of a predator born to hunt. Her counterattack was precise and devastating, silver claws manifesting from her fingertips to rake across Seraphina's armour in sparks of light and shadow. The crowd roared its approval as first blood was drawn, but both combatants ignored the noise. This was no longer about spectacle or politics. This was about survival. They separated and circled each other, 2 apex predators recognizing that their initial assessment of the other's capabilities had been dangerously inadequate. "You're better than I expected," Seraphina admitted, dark power coiling around her like smoke. "But skill alone won't save you from what I'm about to unleash." She began to change, her perfect human form warping and shifting as she called upon power that came with a price written in her very flesh. Her limbs elongated, her fingers became talons that dripped with poison, and her face stretched into something that was no longer entirely human. "This is what the Eastern Lords taught me," she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that spoke of things that should not exist in the mortal world. "This is what I became to earn the right to stand beside the beast of the North." The transformation was an abomination, a perversion of the sacred bond between human and wolf that made every pure-blooded spectator recoil in horror. Seraphina had allowed herself to become something monstrous, trading her very humanity for power that tasted of graves and broken promises. "You sacrificed everything that made you worthy of him," Kira said, with something that almost sounded like pity. "And for what? Power that reeks of corruption and desperation?" "For victory," Seraphina replied, launching herself forward with claws extended and poison dripping from her fangs. The battle that followed was brutal and beautiful, silver light clashing against shadow-wrapped claws while the arena itself seemed to hold its breath. Kira fought with the fluid grace of her royal heritage, every movement precise and economical. Seraphina attacked with the desperate fury of someone who had sacrificed everything for this single moment. But corruption, no matter how powerful, could not stand indefinitely against purity of purpose. Silver light began to burn away the shadows that cloaked Seraphina's transformed flesh, revealing the price she had paid for her borrowed power. Her skin was mottled with decay, her bones showed through translucent flesh, and her eyes held the desperate hunger of someone who was already dying from the inside out. "Look at what you've become," Kira said during a brief pause in the combat, her voice carrying genuine sadness. "Look at what they convinced you to sacrifice for their ambitions." "It was worth it," Seraphina gasped, though her voice lacked conviction. To stand beside him, to rule at his side, any price was worth paying. "But you never would have ruled beside him," Kira replied, pressing her advantage as Seraphina's corrupted form began to falter. "You would have been their puppet, their tool to control him. They never intended for you to have real power." The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. For just an instant, doubt flickered across Seraphina's monstrous features, and in that moment of weakness, Kira struck. Not with claws or magic, but with truth delivered with the absolute authority of royal blood. "You were never his mate," she said, her voice ringing across the arena like a pronouncement of destiny. "The bond you claimed was a lie. The connection you fought for was an illusion, and deep in your heart you have always known it." Seraphina's transformation began to unravel, dark magic consuming itself as the foundations of her power cracked. The Eastern Lords had built her strength on deception and desperation, and now that foundation was collapsing beneath the weight of undeniable truth. "No," she whispered, her voice becoming increasingly human as the monstrous aspects of her form fell away like discarded masks. "No, I was meant to be his queen. I was chosen. I was promised." "You were used," Kira said with infinite gentleness, "and I am truly sorry for what they took from you in service to their schemes." The pity in her voice was the final blow. Seraphina collapsed to her knees in the centre of the arena, her borrowed power spent and her transformed flesh returning to its original human shape. But the decay remained, eating away at her from the inside like a cancer that could no longer be hidden. "Kill me," she begged, looking up at Kira with eyes that were once again beautifully blue but now held the knowledge of approaching death. "End this. I have nothing left." "No," Kira said firmly. "Your life is not mine to take, but your time in this territory is finished." She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying to every corner of the arena. "Let it be known that this challenge is ended. Seraphina of the Eastern Territories is defeated and banished from these lands. She will have safe passage to the borders, but if she returns, it will be as an enemy of the crown." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Kira's attention was already shifting away from her defeated opponent to the place where Fenrir stood waiting. The mate bond between them pulsed with pride and desire, and the bone-deep satisfaction of a challenge met and conquered. As she walked toward him across the blood-stained arena floor, Kira felt the final pieces of her transformation clicking into place. She was no longer fighting to prove her worth or struggling to understand her destiny. She was a queen who had defended her claim in honourable combat, and now it was time to claim her mate and her crown with equal authority. The beast of the north stepped down from his place of honour, his storm-grey eyes blazing with something that made her breath catch. When he reached her, he did not speak. Instead, he dropped to one knee before the entire assembled crowd and bowed his head in submission that was all the more powerful for being freely given. "My queen," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence like a declaration of war against any who would challenge their bond. "My mate, my equal in all things." Kira looked down at the most feared wolf on the continent, kneeling before her by choice rather than compulsion, and felt the last of her doubts fall away like shed skin. She was exactly who she was meant to be. "Rise, my beast," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of royal blood. "We have a kingdom to rule." As Fenrir stood and claimed her lips in a kiss that tasted like victory and destiny fulfilled, the crowd's cheers echoed off the arena walls like thunder. In the place where she had once scrubbed blood from stones as a powerless servant, Kira had finally claimed her birthright as queen. The transformation was complete, and the real work was just beginning.